Hey everyone, it's Mike with Fire in the Head Productions and Savage Kingdoms role-playing game. I haven't done a video in quite a while, so I am apparently doing one now. I just wanted to share some updates with you folks about Savage Kingdoms 3, the playtest that we've been doing for the last couple of months. I have the playtest rules out as of about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and have run several sessions with the RPG camps that I run for 10 to 17-year-olds. So we play D&D 5th edition, but also we've been play testing my game Savage Kingdoms, which looks like this. So there you go. It's probably backwards on the screen, but anyway, that is the little postcards that we're posting around town. Town being Asheville, which is where I live here in the mountains of North Carolina. So we're playtesting in a couple of local game shops, and like I said, we've been playtesting in the RPG camps that I run at the Wyvern's Tail game shop here in North Asheville, so shout out to them. They've always been very helpful. So if you're in Asheville looking for game supplies and you don't know about the Wyvern's Tail, I highly recommend dropping in. Very friendly folks, have tons of gaming supplies from board games to role-playing games to miniatures games to whatnot. And in the top story are game rooms, which are generally pretty happening. So, all right. So just an update on the Savage Kingdoms 3 role-playing stuff for those of you who might be interested. Overall, it's gone quite well. I'm very happy the design goals have been met for the most part. One of the design goals was the lower simplified math. That's definitely worked out pretty much like I thought, which is great. In general, all the numbers sort of lower by 5. That's just a generalization. Some things work out a little differently. But yeah, and I'll get to more of that in just a second. I have a little script that I need to possibly follow. So I'll just go down the little list of notes that I have here. So that was an overall thing. It's gone quite well. It's gone 90% like I've hoped. So maybe I'll get to the 10% in a bit. So number one, attributes. So the attributes now run their plus minus attributes. So they used to be in the old system, the original system and reforged system. They ran from 1 to 10, which I still like as a system because in everyday life, a lot of us use 1 to 10 rankings of things. Oh, on a 1 to 10, what do you think that is? Oh, it's a 6 or it's a 3 or it's a 9 or whatever. However, that produced higher numbers. So I've gone with as some of you may already know this, I've gone with the plus minus numbers. So plus 0 is obviously average, whereas in the old system 5 was. Again, reduces by 5. So if you have a plus 2 or plus 3 in an attribute, that's pretty darn good. That's extraordinary. A minus 2, minus 3, not so much. And it's particularly with the kid gamers, for some reason, they seem to connect with that system even more. I think they're so used to video games, and also because I guess maybe their brains aren't quite as full of crap and as detailed as an adult brain yet. But so they look at the plus minus very, very simplified, and that's a good thing. You look at your character sheet and go, oh, okay, I'm not so great at that, or I'm good at that. So it works out well with them as well. It also sort of matches D&D 5th edition. They have the, D&D in general, all editions, the 3 to 18 scale. But now with the modifiers, a lot of gamers, particularly the younger gamers, they don't even use the score anymore. They don't say I have a strength of 13. They say my strength is plus 1. Or I have a dexterity of 8. Instead of 8, I have a negative 1, because that's what the modifier is for that. So this sort of goes along with that without being it exactly, because it is its own game, of course. So overall, that's gone really well. Number 2, the 2-action economy. So in the original Savage Kingdoms, we had primary and 2 simple actions that you got each round. A combat round was 5 seconds. So roughly, give or take. So a primary action was your main thing, was casting a spell or making an attack or whatever. And then your simple actions were movement or drawing a weapon, or there were a couple of talents that you could use that were simple actions. But mostly it was for movement, drawing a weapon, or attacking or casting a spell. And sometimes those were one of the same. So I went with a 2-action economy. I decided to try to play test that for SK3, thinking that it would probably go pretty well. And it has. So I've literally put it works pretty well. The only sort of weirdnesses that have come up, and this is going to happen, is that um, the caveats, I guess I should say, is that you can only have one attack action in a given round. And now combat rounds are 6 seconds. I went ahead and just embraced the 6 second combat round that other game systems use instead of 5 seconds, because that way you get 10 combat rounds in a minute instead of 12. Anyway, just works out better. And that way you can also visualize that each action that you're taking is roughly 3 seconds. So the only caveat is that only one action in a given round can be an attack action, and you can only cast one spell in a given round. And an attack is more than the obvious. An attack is obviously striking someone with an axe or a sword is pretty obvious. But an attack is also anything that forces someone to try to resist it. So even a beguile spell, trying to beguile or charm someone, forces them to make a resolve roll. So therefore it's opposed. So in a sense that is an attack. And that'll be more clear in the rules, because I don't think it really is right now. It's just something that I know in my head. So when I GM it's a game master, it's easy for me as a designer, but I think other GMs might be kind of like, not quite sure. But so that's the only thing once we get beyond that. Which leads me to the next little point of this. I doubt it though, I might move to primary and secondary actions. So instead of 2 actions, one is a primary action, one's a secondary. Primary is attack, a spell, a major thing. Secondary is a movement. The problem is that I have with that nomenclature is that it shows like moving isn't necessarily more secondary than what your primary action would be, right? See, in other words, the game terms, they're only there to clarify a couple things. Like we know that primary is always an attack, secondary is a non-attack thing or non-a-spell thing. So that's the only reason that nomenclature would exist. So I think it's kind of confusing. So I think it's better just to stay with the 2 action economy and just know that one of those actions, only one of those can be an attack, a form of attack or a form of assault against a foe or whatever, whether it's a subtle spell or whether it's a direct attack or whatever. I think it becomes clear once you start playing it. So most likely I'll keep that like it is. It seems to be working out well. Also another clarification on that I added to the playtest document that I've sent some of my close friends and playtesters. So if you guys are watching this, a thing that's been added is certain actions or 0 actions or free actions. So however, you can only take one of those per. If you take 2 of those, it becomes an action. So for example, drawing a weapon is a free action, unless it's like on your horse's saddlebags or something. It would take 2, 3, 4 seconds to get. It's assumed if it's in a scabbard or if it's somewhere on your body that you can get to it very quickly, as most warriors would have worn their weapons that way. It defeats the purpose if you can't get to them quickly. So that's free action. So for example, another free action is throwing down a weapon. So if you were to draw a weapon and then toss it down, that's basically 2 free actions. So that would actually cost you an action, which kind of makes sense because that would probably take a couple seconds. Another example of a free action is pulling a flask of oil out of your belt pouch or whatever. So if you were to draw a weapon and also draw a flask of oil or holy water or whatever, that's technically 2 free actions. That becomes an action. So as you can see, that kind of makes sense because you can imagine that would take 2 or 3 seconds to do all of that. So I think I covered all that action stuff. So that's how that's clarified. Okay, so point number 3, somewhat deadlier, which is good. Actually, one of my design goals, and I know some people don't want to hear that because they want their characters always to live and survive without any challenge. However, the really good role players, unfortunately, that's 95% of the people that I've seen and tend to role play with. They like challenges. They like story. They don't always want to necessarily win because it's a story-based game. You're not necessarily winning. Always succeeding is not necessarily winning in a narrative game. So I wanted to make the system slightly deadlier. It is called Savage Kingdoms in the original edition in my games, and maybe I'm occasionally a little too benevolent as a GM. I mean, there's only been like 4 or 5 deaths out of 20, 30 campaigns I've run. That's pretty low. Um, there's been characters really hurt and stuff. Stuff has happened, but it hasn't quite had the impact that I was originally hoping it to have. So, and it's very simple. So the fact that the numbers reduced by 5, on one hand, means that the foe's numbers reduce as well. But there's a simple mathematical effect or condition that's causing the playtest to be slightly deadlier, which is perfect. And that's because 0 is a constant, right? So if you get to 0 health, you are unconscious. If you get to negative half your health, you're dead. So the very simple mathematical fact that 0 is a constant, even though the numbers are reducing, you're still reducing closer to 0. 0 never moves. It doesn't reduce. So that in and of itself is causing the game to be slightly more deadly, which is perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping for. So somewhat deadlier health-wise and such, with 0 now a closer threshold. I basically just said that. I'm looking at my notes now. This is a good thing. Also said that. So it's causing combat scenes and other action visceral scenes to be more visceral, the players to be more into the story, and they're not doing the thing which sadly a lot of D&D players do, where it's just like, we run into combat no matter what because we know that our characters are amazing and we have millions of hit points. So it's causing people to role play better. They're really thinking about, maybe we should engage in this battle, maybe we should try to sneak by this possible opponent or negotiate with them. So I've definitely seen more of that, so that's awesome. And there has yet to be a death in the playtest games, so to add on to that, but there have been several super close, several unconscious characters. One character was 1 point, I think this happened twice. A character was 1 point from bleeding to death completely, was saved at the last minute, which again is what you want. You want some cool narrative, visceral scene work, and so that's what happened there. So that's great. All right, point number 4, the bulk system works well. So that the bulk system is instead of tracking poundage, or whatever metric system you like to convert that to, but I'm using good old English and American pounds, or was using it. We now have a bulk system, which, on a side note, I noticed Pathfinder 2nd Edition apparently is using too, and I'm like, great. I thought I was being somewhat innovative there, but apparently not. So apparently they use a bulk system too. So basically what that represents is that instead of tracking every pound of equipment that a character is carrying, certain items have a bulk rating of 1 to 50, really, it could be. But to give an example, bulk 1 is like a chainmail shirt. Battle axe, I think, is bulk 1. No, I think a great axe. Anyway, some of the heavier weapons have bulk 1 or 2 possibly. I think a maul, a big giant two-handed hammer might be bulk 3. I can't remember. May still be 2, but in any case, the only difference, the Pathfinder system seems to scale up slightly higher, like their bulk numbers are a little higher. So that makes me feel a little bit better. That's not a complete accidental copy. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. All we game designers kind of share things. We just might name them slightly differently. So that's worked really well. It's easier to track. A caveat to the system I've now put into the document is that if you're 10 bulk 0 items equal 1 bulk. So, for example, a candle is bulk 0. So if you you can't be like, I'm carrying 200 candles and I'm not slowed down. So a candle is actually one of those items that actually 20 of those equal a bulk 1, which makes sense. You're carrying a sack of 20 candles. It's a little bulky and kind of also weird. I think it's easier to track than pounds. It's basically the same thing. It's just, again, the numbers are scaled down, and one of the design goals of the system was easier math and scaling the numbers down. When you scale numbers down, they become worth more. The whole reason that it's a silver-based economy instead of gold. Anyway, I could make a whole new video about that, but I don't want to stray too much. So bulk system seems to work out. For just a quick example on that before I close out the bulk system thing, is that, as you may know, someone with an average physique of +0, which, physique in Savage Kingdoms represents not only your physical strength, but also your size, kind of a composite rating. They can carry up to 6 bulk items before they're being into the next category of encumbrance, which I think is actually called encumbered. Or no, hindered. Hindered is the first level of encumbrance in the SK3 system. And then it's 12, so then it just kind of doubles from there. So you can, a physique plus 0 person can carry up to, what would it be, 6 times 24 bulk items. But at that level, that's burdened. You're slowed to 3/4, you're 1/4 your mobility. You have -5 on all your die rolls because you're carrying and wearing all this crap. At that point, you can actually only push, pull, or drag the item unless you have serious assistance. So just a little note on how that works. So I think it's pretty realistic, or believable is probably the better word for fantasy, but also easy to track at the same time. So goal accomplished, I think. Okay, number five. Critical successes are slightly rarer, averaging 1 to 2 per session. I'd say it's closer to 2. And I'm counting that as a good thing. So in the old system, critical successes and critical failures happened a little more often, and that's fine. They weren't like overly ridiculous. But the problem is, kind of to the point I just made a few moments ago, when making stuff count. So was it Tolkien, someone who said, one of my favorite quotes, when everything's magical, nothing is. So the same with critical successes. If there's 10 critical successes in a game session, then they're not as special anymore. So I think we're right where we need to be. So you still need to score 20 above the DL. And since the math is lowered by 5, you can see how that would be a little more difficult, but not impossible. So I put down, but they've been averaging 1 to 2 per session. I think it's closer to 2, and there's been a couple sessions where even 3 or I think even 4 critical successes happen throughout the whole session. So again, good. It makes them special and really cool. In the rule system too, you'll see the payoff, like the sample critical successes in the skill section and spell section. They're also slightly bigger payoff, most of them. So they are rarer, but they have a little more punch now, which is cool. So that's the trade-off. On to point number 6, which is sort of segues with point number 5, critical failures. Critical failures are quite rare, with only 3 occurring in the last 10 sessions. This is what I've documented. So that's a little low. I wanted them to be fairly low. One thing that annoys me about, it's not even an official rule, but a lot of Dungeon Masters in D&D do the thing where a natural 1 on a D20, so that's a 5% chance, is always a critical failure, which is kind of ridiculous. We're talking about a game, a story with heroes. So you roll 20 times in a session, odds are you're going to get at least 1 critical failure. By the way, that's run. That's not even official rules, but that's what a lot of people do, which I always thought was ridiculous. So in the current, back to SK, in the old system, natural 1's imploded. So if you rolled a natural 1 on the D20, you added your modifier, so you get a +6, and then you have to pick up the die and re-roll and subtract. It's an imploding 1, whereas the 20s were exploding. And if you got a 0 or less, you critically failed. And that was kind of a fun system. I was sort of proud of it, and people thought it was kind of cool. But it's sort of like was happening a little too often, and it kind of slowed the gameplay down. One of the reasons I elected to go with a single die system, especially in combat where damage and to hit runs off the same die roll, is to speed up play, make it more narrative, make it in the moment, make it more visceral. So the imploding 1s, though, it's kind of an interesting mechanic, kind of slowed things down a little bit. So the current SK3 system, as you may know, is if you get a 0 or less, a modified 0 or less on any roll, that's a crit failure. So if you're -2 in something, say if you're trying acrobatics and your agility is -2 and you have no skill levels in it, that's -2 from the die roll. So that's, 10% chance that's going to happen, that you're going to crit fail in the current system, which sounds like, it'll happen a fair amount. But the thing is, it hasn't really happened that much at all. Again, only 3 crit failures have happened in 10 game sessions, and these are fairly long sessions. These are like 3, 4, 5 hour sessions with a good bit of story in it, and therefore a lot of dice rolls. So, again, though I want that to be low, I think it's a little too low. So what I'm looking at doing, actually I'm almost certain I'm going to be doing, is possibly altering the system to natural ones failing by 10 or more. So just to elaborate more on that. So if you roll a natural 1 now, in the new system that I'm proposing, you add your modifier, as before, if you have one. And if it's 10 less of the DL, then you failed. So for example, say the DL is 15. You need to get a 15 or better. You roll a natural 1. You add, say you have a +4 bonus in it. So that gives you a 4. So you need a 15. You failed by 11 right there, right? So that would be a critical failure. You failed by 10 or more. So I think that's kind of cool. The reason I like that is that brings back the sort of old school lore of the natural 1. Like, oh my God, I rolled a 1. But without it being automatic. Like I'm an awesome swordsman, and yet I rolled a 1 5% of the time, and my sword flies or sticks someone in the eye. That's ridiculous. So, but you still have the stigma of the natural 1, like, oh my God, something bad could happen. And you add your modifier, and if it's 10 or less, it is a failure. But if you're less than 10 short of the DL, you're fine. So that also gives, again, it gives the stigma of the natural 1 thing back, but it also gives skilled characters a lot less chance of failure, which is what it should be, or critical failure. And the less skilled characters will critically fail more often. And that's pretty believable, pretty realistic. And the math is still pretty simple. Okay, so number 7, combat and damage system is pretty smooth and fast. Yes, my words, very, very deep. So to add more to that, combat and damage system is pretty smooth and fast. What I mean by that is several things. So one thing, which I've already mentioned, the lower math numbers, so much easier. It's one good thing about D&D 5th edition that I will say that I like. In fact, the numbers are pretty close to that. They get a little higher in SK3 because you have more customization. So for example, if you start with a attribute of, say, +4, you're a race or culture that can actually start with a +4. You're going to suffer in other areas. But say you have a +4 in something, and then you max out your starting skill level at 3, which is the maximum you can start in a skill. So that gives you a +7 off the bat. But that's maxing out things. So that's +7. That's easier to handle in your head. In the old system, that would have been +12, maybe a +13. Which is fine, but the numbers got really high, and I noted that being a problem, particularly with GMs. I actually am lucky that I can do head math pretty well, pretty quickly, and I was even having struggling with it. So I kind of use that as a base because I'm like, yeah, I'm actually decent at that, and even I'm kind of like, and I wrote the game. I'm like, I think it's a 39. I don't know. So part of the reason, getting back to the original point, combat and damage system is faster and smooth because the numbers are smaller. Another reason for that is there are no longer weapon damage modifiers like in the old system. Like even a short sword had +2. So everything above a dagger and a club, I believe, had a damage modifier. So now those are gone, mostly. So they still exist in armor piercing. Those of you who have the rules and haven't quite figured out what the armor piercing thing is, it just simply adds to your damage. Because even if you're not wearing armor, like armor is your flesh and your bone and your muscle is still armor, right? So anything physical. So say for example, you're using a battle axe two-handed, that's armor piercing 2. So you roll the die. If you scored 4 above the defense of your opponent, that's 4 damage +2 for the armor piercing, 6 points of damage. Subtract the armor, foe's armor, if there's any. Done. 6 points, so very quick. That was all done in like 2.5 seconds. Whereas before, it was another step. You had to go, okay, battle axe is +200, +4 modifier, and then weight, and no armor. So yeah. So it's still there, but it's an armor piercing, and not every weapon has armor piercing. So most weapons, the lighter and most one-handed medium weapons, don't have armor piercing. So it's just straight numbers. Just I hit I scored 6 over the opponent's defense, 6 points of damage. So armor piercing runs up to 3 base with most weapons. With for example, a great axe or great sword, but a master crafted great axe or great sword is 4 because it has +1 master crafted weapons. But again, small number, easy to deal with, and those are exceptional situations instead of common situations. So that's another reason the combat runs pretty fast. The DLs are a little lower, so that kind of ties in with the easier math. That's another reason it runs a little faster. And I think, again, it runs faster because the 2-action economy is a little bit more intuitive. It's like, is that a primary and 2 symbols? It's like, you get 2 actions, and it's usually pretty quick to resolve. It's like, I move and I attack, or I cast a spell. If it's a non-attack spell, you can actually cast a spell and then attack the next, which is great because some spells enhance weapons, such as Conjure Flame or Conjure Lightning or something like that. You take an action to cast a spell on your weapon, and then you have, since it's not an attack, then you could do your second action as an attack with that flaming or lightning weapon or whatever, or frost-covered weapon or whatever it is. So, all right, so that's why that's number 7, and that's really all I wanted to cover today. This video is already at a little over 25 minutes, so that's probably plenty. I just wanted to share the update. Like and subscribe to this YouTube channel that I don't really do a whole lot with, but I'm trying to do a little bit more with, perhaps. Check out Savage Kingdoms, particularly Savage Kingdoms 3, coming out probably next May. We're going to kickstart it probably in April or May of next year. Blah, blah, blah. This little thing says coming July 2019, in reverse, apparently. That means that we're sort of doing a public playtest starting in July, which we did. We started back in July with the RPG camps and a couple other private playtests, and we're still playtesting here in August. And I'll be at DragonCon, appearing at DragonCon, playtesting this as well. So if you're at DragonCon down in Atlanta, coming up in Labor Day weekend, come sign up for some games. There's still some slots available. 1 or 2 have sold out, but there's several other game sessions that still have several slots open. Actually, one has all of them, like all 6 slots open, so that's great. So come check that out. I think you'll like the improvements we've done in the game. I have run into a couple of people that were kind of surprisingly fans of the game. I mean, I'm not surprised that people like it. That's great. I'm humbled and honored, but it's kind of weird when it's such a tiny game, especially compared to Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder and Savage Worlds and whatever. To hear like, oh, I'm a fan of I've got all the books, and it's going to be really hard to beat your previous games in SK3, and then they played a playtest session of it and really liked it and admitted that it's probably going to be better. So that was really cool to have someone that was really into the game, enjoyed the work, and also feels like that the next iteration is going to be even better. So that makes me feel pretty good. So, all right. Yeah, so check out the other videos, check out the game when it comes out, and I'll talk to you guys later.